5 years ago, I purchased my dream, 20 acres of rolling countryside with a modest farmhouse and a sturdy old barn. After 15 years of concrete jungle living and saving every penny from my accounting job, I had finally escaped to the rural paradise I had always wanted. The property needed work. The fences sagged in places, the barn roof leaked during heavy storms, and the house itself required extensive renovation. But it was mine, all mine, and I poured my heart and soul into transforming it. The previous owners had been cattle farmers on a small scale, which inspired me to try my hand at livestock. I started small with a few chickens, then added 2 goats that quickly became my lawn maintenance crew. But my pride and joy came 2 years into my rural adventure when I purchased Thunder as a wobbly-legged calf. He was a magnificent Spanish fighting bull with a gleaming black coat and powerful shoulders that suggested the impressive animal he would become. Thunder grew quickly under my care. Despite his intimidating breed reputation, he developed a gentle temperament with me. Each morning, I would bring him fresh hay and speak to him softly while he ate. He would follow me around his paddock like an oversized puppy, occasionally nudging my back with his massive head when I turned away. People warned me about keeping such a powerful animal, but I invested heavily in proper fencing, a reinforced barn stall, and safety training. Thunder and I understood each other, and that was all that mattered in our peaceful corner of the countryside. That tranquility shattered when the Wilsons purchased the adjacent property last spring. The elderly couple who lived there previously had been ideal neighbors, quiet, respectful of boundaries, and always willing to share their garden surplus. The Wilsons seemed pleasant enough during our first meeting, David with his firm handshake, and Margaret with her perfectly maintained blonde bob and wide smile that never quite reached her eyes. "We are so excited to experience country living," Margaret gushed during our first encounter at the property line. "The previous owners mentioned you keep some animals. How charming. I have always wanted to live near a little farm." I invited them over for dinner the following weekend, eager to establish good neighborly relations. Margaret seemed particularly interested in my property layout, asking numerous questions about my acreage, water rights, and how long I had lived there. Her interest seemed innocent enough at the time, just a newcomer trying to understand rural living. I even took them on a tour, proudly showing off Thunder, who was by then approaching his full impressive size. "That is a dangerous animal," Margaret commented, her smile tightening. "Are you certain your fencing is adequate? I would hate for there to be any accidents." "Thunder is perfectly safe," I assured her. "The fencing exceeds county requirements, and he has never shown aggression." The dinner ended pleasantly enough, but looking back, I should have recognized the calculating look in Margaret's eyes when she surveyed my land. The first warning sign appeared 3 weeks later when I noticed one of my property markers had been moved about 10 feet into my pasture. I assumed it was an accident, perhaps disturbed by wildlife, and simply reset it. 2 days later, I received the first official-looking letter in my mailbox. The letter came from the county planning department, informing me that a complaint had been filed regarding an encroaching fence on my property line. According to the complaint, my eastern fence, the one bordering the Wilsons' property, allegedly extended several feet onto their land and needed to be moved immediately. The letter requested I contact the department to schedule an inspection. I stood at my mailbox, reading and rereading the official document with growing disbelief. The fence had been in place for decades, installed by the previous owners and clearly marked on all property surveys. I called the county office immediately and scheduled an inspection for the following week. That evening, I walked my eastern property line, checking the markers against my deed maps. Everything aligned perfectly with my documents. As I completed my inspection, I noticed movement near the tree line. Margaret Wilson stood on her property, photographing me with her smartphone. "Good evening, Margaret," I called out, trying to maintain civility. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I am documenting the property violation," she replied coldly. "My husband and I have reviewed the historical property maps from the county archives. This land has historically included an access easement to the pond behind your barn. Your fence blocks our rightful access." I was dumbfounded. "There is no easement listed on my deed, Margaret. I reviewed all documents thoroughly before purchasing." "The easement predates your paperwork," she insisted. "The previous owners acknowledged our right to use the pathway to the pond. We expect that right to be honored." This was the first I had heard of any disputed access rights. The elderly couple who sold me the property had never mentioned an easement, formal or informal. When I expressed this to Margaret, her expression hardened. "We will see what the county has to say," she said before turning abruptly and walking back to her house. The county inspector arrived the following Tuesday, a taciturn woman named Helen who had clearly dealt with property disputes for decades. She methodically surveyed the boundary, comparing her measurements to the official county records. After 2 hours of careful work, she confirmed what I already knew. My fence was precisely where it should be, and there was no recorded easement granting the Wilsons access across my property. "Your boundaries are correctly marked according to county records," Helen stated flatly as she packed her equipment. "I will file my report today. They can appeal if they wish, but the documentation is quite clear." I thanked Helen and watched her drive away, feeling vindicated but uneasy. The dispute should have ended there, but Margaret Wilson was not one to accept defeat. Within days, I began hearing from other neighbors that Margaret had been sharing concerns about my dangerous bull and improper farming practices. She claimed thunder posed a threat to neighborhood children and that my property violated multiple county ordinances. The psychological toll began to mount as I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder on my own land. I started checking my fences twice daily, paranoid that something would happen to thunder. The rural dream I had worked so hard to achieve was transforming into a nightmare of hypervigilance. One morning, I discovered the first act of clear vandalism. A 20-foot section of fence had been cut, the wires cleanly severed and posts damaged. Fortunately, Thunder was secured in his barn for the night and had not wandered through the opening. I repaired the damage immediately and filed a police report, but without evidence of who had done it, the officers could do little beyond documenting the incident. That evening, I installed the first security cameras around my property, focusing on the boundary with the Wilsons and the areas around Thunder's barn and paddock. The expense strained my budget, but the peace of mind was worth every penny. Little did I know then how crucial that security system would prove to be. As I finished mounting the final camera, Margaret appeared at the property line, watching me work. "Cameras now," she called out. "What are you so afraid of?" "Just documenting activity on my property," I replied evenly, "for everyone's protection." "You should be worried about that bull, not your fences," she said. "Animals like that do not belong in residential areas." "This is agricultural land, Margaret, not residential," I corrected her, "and Thunder is contained safely and legally." She stared at me for a long moment before responding. "We will see about that." That night, I discovered another section of fence damaged, this time directly in front of one of my newly installed cameras. Thunder's barn was my pride and joy, a structure I had painstakingly reinforced and modified for both his comfort and safety. Most people do not understand the specific requirements for housing a bull of his size and breed. The stall walls were constructed of 6-inch oak beams that could withstand tremendous force. The door featured a specialized double-latch system that required opposable thumbs to open, impossible for even the cleverest bull to manipulate. The paddock fencing stood 8 feet high, with reinforced posts every 6 feet, exceeding the county agricultural code requirements by a substantial margin. I had designed this sanctuary with Thunder's well-being as my primary concern, but also with full awareness of my responsibility to keep my neighbors safe. Spanish fighting bulls are not naturally aggressive toward humans when properly raised, but their size and strength demand respect and proper containment. Thunder had never shown dangerous behavior, but I never took chances with his housing. My security measures did not impress Margaret Wilson. 3 days after our fence confrontation, an animal control officer appeared at my door with a clipboard and stern expression. "We received a complaint about an exotic and dangerous animal being kept on the premises without proper permits or containment," he explained. "I need to inspect your bull and his housing." I welcomed the inspection, confident in my setup. The officer, a middle-aged man named Ray who clearly knew his livestock, spent nearly 2 hours examining every aspect of Thunder's living arrangement. He tested gates, measured fence heights, and observed Thunder's behavior as I moved around the paddock. "This is one of the most secure setups I have seen for a bull this size," Ray finally concluded, making notes on his clipboard. "Your containment exceeds all county requirements, and the animal appears healthy and well socialized. I see no violations whatsoever." Relief washed over me as he handed me a copy of his inspection report, which clearly stated that my property was in full compliance with all relevant codes. I thanked him for his thoroughness, hoping this official validation would put an end to Margaret's complaints. It only seemed to intensify her campaign. The following week brought 3 more official complaints, this time about noise and odor from my livestock. Each complaint triggered an inspection, and each inspection confirmed my compliance with county regulations. The pattern became exhausting: complaint, inspection, validation, new complaint. My security cameras began capturing disturbing footage. Margaret would approach my property line when she thought I was away, taking photographs of Thunder's paddock and testing the fence tension with her hands. On 2 occasions, she attempted to agitate Thunder by waving a red cloth at him through the fence, a cliché based on bullfighting myths that fortunately had no effect on him beyond mild curiosity. Most concerning were her nighttime visits. The motion-activated cameras recorded Margaret approaching Thunder's barn after midnight, examining the door and lock system by flashlight. She never attempted entry during these reconnaissance missions, but the intent seemed clear. She was learning the security system, perhaps looking for vulnerabilities. I compiled the footage and brought it to the local sheriff's office, requesting they speak with Margaret about trespassing. The deputy who reviewed the evidence agreed the behavior was concerning, but advised that since she had not actually crossed onto my property in the footage, they could only issue a warning. "Document everything," he advised. "If she steps 1 foot on your property without permission, call us immediately." I upgraded my security system further, adding lights and additional cameras with improved night vision. The expense was significant, but my growing anxiety about Thunder's safety made it necessary. I began having trouble sleeping, often waking at the slightest sound from outside, convinced Margaret was prowling around my property. My fears were validated during a direct confrontation that occurred while I was repairing a section of fence. Margaret approached from her side of the property line, watching me work with undisguised contempt. "That animal is a menace to this community," she declared without preamble. The county officials may be fooled by your so-called safety measures, but I know better. Thunder has never harmed anyone, I replied, continuing my repair work. The inspectors have confirmed my setup exceeds all safety requirements. Bureaucrats checking boxes, she scoffed. They will not be responsible when something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong with dangerous animals. I straightened up, meeting her gaze directly. The only danger to my animal appears to be you, Margaret. I have footage of you approaching his enclosure at night. I would appreciate if you stayed away from my bull and my barn. Her face flushed with anger. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I have gotten dangerous animals removed from 3 previous neighborhoods. If the county will not take appropriate action, there are other ways to handle the situation. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. It is a promise, she replied, her voice eerily calm. One way or another, I will make sure that Bull is gone. You might want to consider selling him before something unfortunate happens. She turned and walked away, leaving me chilled despite the warm afternoon sun. That night I lay awake in bed, listening to the soft summer rain beginning to fall, wondering what Margaret's next move would be. The distant sound of Thunder's occasional movements in his barn normally comforted me, but that night they only heightened my anxiety. Something was coming. I could feel it. The storm had intensified by midnight, with rain drumming steadily against my bedroom window and occasional lightning illuminating the countryside in brief, electric flashes. I had finally managed to drift into uneasy sleep when my phone blared with a security alert, jolting me fully awake. I fumbled for the device, my heart racing as I opened the notification. The security app showed a live feed from the camera mounted above Thunder's barn. Through the curtain of rain, a figure moved deliberately across my property, Margaret Wilson, instantly recognizable even with her rain jacket hood pulled up. What sent ice through my veins was the object she carried, a sledgehammer, swinging at her side as she approached the barn door. I could not believe what I was seeing. This was not mere trespassing or harassment. This was breaking and entering, potentially endangering both Thunder and herself. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, my eyes never leaving the phone screen displaying the live feed. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice seemed surreally composed against the chaos unfolding on my property. A woman is trying to break into my barn with a sledgehammer, I explained, my voice tight with urgency. My bull is inside. She could get hurt or release a dangerous animal. I need police at 1472 County Road 8 immediately. Officers are being dispatched, the dispatcher assured me. Are you in a safe location? I am in my house, but I need to stop her before she gets that door open. I was already pulling on boots and a raincoat, my attention divided between the phone call and the security feed. On screen, Margaret had reached the barn door and was examining the heavy padlock. Sir, please remain in your house until officers arrive, the dispatcher instructed, but I was already heading for the door. I cannot do that. If she releases my bull, someone could be killed, I replied, ending the call as I rushed outside into the downpour. The rain immediately soaked through my clothing as I sprinted across the muddy yard toward the barn. Lightning cracked overhead, briefly illuminating the property in stark relief. The distance from house to barn, normally a pleasant 2-minute walk, stretched endlessly before me as adrenaline and fear propelled me forward. I could hear it before I could see it clearly, the metallic clang of the sledgehammer striking against the padlock, followed by the agitated bellowing of thunder inside the barn. The bull, normally so calm, was clearly distressed by the unfamiliar sounds and late-night disturbance. Each impact against the door increased his agitation. I could hear his hooves scraping against the stall floor and his increasingly frantic vocalizations. Margaret did not notice my approach, so focused was she on the lock that had already begun to bend under the force of her blows. Her face was a mask of determination, water streaming down her features as she raised the sledgehammer for another strike. The padlock, designed to withstand significant force, was beginning to fail. "Margaret, stop!" I shouted over the rain and thunder. She whirled toward me, sledgehammer still raised, her eyes wild with a zealot's conviction. "This ends tonight," she shouted back. "That animal is a menace, and you have refused to take proper action." "The police are on their way," I warned, approaching cautiously, painfully aware of the weapon in her hands. "Put down the sledgehammer and leave my property." "I am conducting a citizen inspection," she declared, the absurdity of her claim underscored by the sledgehammer in her white-knuckled grip. "There have been reports of animal mistreatment. I have the right to check on the welfare of potentially abused animals." "That is not how the law works, and you know it," I countered, moving slowly closer, trying to place myself between her and the barn door. "Thunder is agitated now. If you open that door, he could hurt you or escape." "Do not try to stop me," she threatened, adjusting her grip on the sledgehammer. "I have documented your negligence for months. The authorities have failed to act, so it falls to me to protect this community." Inside the barn, Thunder's movements had become more frantic, his powerful body audibly colliding with the stall walls. The sound sent a fresh wave of panic through me, not for my own safety, but for what might happen if Margaret succeeded in her deranged mission. "Margaret, listen to me," I pleaded, taking another step toward her. "Thunder weighs over 2,000 pounds. If he gets out while agitated, someone will get hurt. Please put down the sledgehammer." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face, perhaps finally registering the real danger of her actions. That hesitation dissolved when another crash of thunder sent a visible shudder through the barn door, followed by an answering bellow from my bull. "See, the animal is dangerous," she exclaimed, raising the sledgehammer again. "It needs to be removed." I lunged forward just as she brought the hammer down, not on the lock this time but on the wooden door itself. The wood splintered under the impact, and Thunder's bellowing intensified. I grabbed for the sledgehammer handle, desperate to wrest it from her grip before she could strike again. We struggled in the rain, both of us slipping in the mud, fighting for control of the weapon. Margaret's strength, fueled by months of obsessive determination, surprised me. She wrenched the sledgehammer away and stumbled backward, raising it defensively. "This is assault," she shrieked. "You are attacking me for trying to protect the community." I opened my mouth to respond when headlights swept across the scene, illuminating us in harsh white light. The sheriff's department cruiser pulled into my drive, 2 officers emerging with flashlights drawn. The beams cut through the rain, fixing on Margaret with the sledgehammer still raised in her hands, the damaged barn door behind her, and me standing soaked and muddy between them. "Drop the weapon, now," one officer commanded, his hand moving to his holster. Margaret froze, her expression transforming from righteous indignation to dawning comprehension of her situation. The sledgehammer lowered slowly to her side but did not drop. "This man is keeping a dangerous animal," she began, her voice taking on the reasonable tone I had heard her use with other neighbors. I was simply. "Drop the weapon immediately," the officer repeated more forcefully. This time Margaret complied, the sledgehammer landing with a heavy thud in the mud. The second officer moved forward to secure it while the first approached cautiously. "Both of you need to explain what is happening here," he said, flashlight beam moving between us. Inside the barn, Thunder continued his agitated movements, though the volume had decreased slightly. My heart still raced with the knowledge of how close we had come to disaster. She was trying to break into my barn with a sledgehammer, I explained, pointing to the damaged door and lock. My bull is inside. He is normally calm, but this disturbance has agitated him. If she had gotten that door open. I let the implication hang in the rain-filled air. The officer nodded, seeming to grasp the potential severity of the situation. He turned to Margaret, who had already begun crafting her defense. "I have filed multiple complaints about this dangerous animal," she insisted, rain plastering her hair to her skull. "The county has failed to act. I was performing a welfare check on potentially mistreated livestock." With a sledgehammer, at midnight, during a thunderstorm, the officer's skepticism was evident even through the rain. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." As the officer recited Miranda rights to a suddenly protesting Margaret Wilson, I moved to check Thunder through the small observation window in the barn wall. The massive bull had ceased his frantic movements but remained on his feet, eyes watchful, muscles tense beneath his gleaming wet coat. It would take hours for him to fully calm down. I turned back to see Margaret being placed in the back of the patrol car, her indignant protests still audible despite the closed door. The second officer approached me, notebook in hand, rain beating on his department-issued slicker. "We are going to need your full statement," he said, "and all security footage of this incident." I nodded, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "I have everything recorded, from her approaching with the sledgehammer to the moment you arrived." As I led the officer toward my house to access the security system footage, I cast one final glance at the barn where Thunder had finally settled, and at the patrol car containing my neighbor. The boundary war had reached its breaking point, but I never imagined it would culminate in a midnight standoff in the pouring rain. The legal system moves with glacial deliberation, even for cases involving midnight sledgehammer attacks. The initial police report classified the incident as attempted breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and animal endangerment. All charges that Margaret Wilson vehemently denied as she was processed at the county jail. She spent only one night in custody before being released on bail, with conditions including a temporary restraining order, prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of my property. 3 days after the incident, I was repairing the damaged barn door when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. David Wilson stepped out, his posture conveying defeat and embarrassment as he approached. I tensed, unsure of his intentions, but his first words dispelled my concern. "I have come to apologize," he said, keeping a respectful distance, "and to ask if we could speak privately." I guided him to the front porch where we sat on opposite ends of the wooden bench. David looked physically diminished, with dark circles under his eyes and a perpetual frown creasing his forehead. "What Margaret did was inexcusable," he began, staring at his clasped hands. "I want you to know I had no idea she planned anything like this. I was away on business when it happened." "She could have been killed," I replied bluntly. "If she had opened that door with Thunder in his agitated state, things would have ended very differently." David nodded, his shoulders slumping further. "I know. The police explained the potential consequences. That is partly why I am here. Margaret wants me to convince you to drop the charges." I stared at him incredulously. She brought a sledgehammer to my barn at midnight. She nearly released a 2,000-pound bull, and now she wants me to pretend nothing happened. "She is not thinking clearly," David admitted, finally meeting my gaze. "This is not the first time something like this has happened. We have moved 3 times in the past 6 years, always after Margaret became fixated on boundary disputes or neighborhood issues." This revelation did not surprise me as much as it should have. "You never thought to mention this when she began harassing me about property lines." "I believed her when she said your fence genuinely encroached on our property," he explained wearily. "By the time the county confirmed it did not, she was already too invested in the conflict. Margaret never backs down once she believes she is right." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, Sheriff Deputy Collins, who had responded to the incident, stopping by to collect additional security footage I had discovered from a camera angle not initially provided. After David left, Deputy Collins shared some information that put the situation in a new light. "We ran a background check on Mrs. Wilson," he explained. "She has a history of similar complaints in 3 previous counties. No criminal charges, but numerous civil disputes and restraining orders." This pattern confirmed what David had reluctantly revealed. Margaret Wilson was not simply a difficult neighbor. She was a woman with a long history of boundary obsession and escalating conflicts. The revelation provided context but no comfort as I realized the depth of her fixation. In the weeks that followed, I discovered an online neighborhood group where Margaret had been systematically building a case against me and Thunder. Her posts painted me as an irresponsible animal owner, harboring a dangerous exotic beast that threatened neighborhood children. She had manipulated photographs to make my fencing appear inadequate and selectively edited video to make Thunder seem aggressive. A substantial community of online supporters had rallied to her cause, none of whom had ever visited my property or met Thunder. The preliminary court hearing occurred 30 days after the incident. I arrived early, dressed in my only suit, clutching a folder containing security footage, inspection reports, and documentation of Margaret's escalating harassment. The courtroom's sterile formality felt oppressive after my rural existence, but I was determined to see the process through. Margaret arrived with her attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit. Gone was the wild-eyed zealot from that rainy night, replaced by a demure, soft-spoken woman in conservative clothing who appeared shocked and hurt by the proceedings. Her performance was masterful. She spoke quietly about her genuine concern for animal welfare and her fear that neighborhood children might be in danger from an exotic fighting bull. When her attorney claimed Margaret had brought the sledgehammer only for self-defense against the bull should it charge her during her welfare check, I nearly laughed aloud at the absurdity. Fortunately, the security footage spoke for itself, showing her deliberate approach and repeated attacks on the lock and door. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, saw through the performance. She not only upheld the temporary restraining order but extended it to a full year and added specific provisions prohibiting Margaret from posting about me or my property online. The evidence clearly indicates a pattern of harassment and escalation culminating in a dangerous and illegal act, the judge stated firmly. This court takes animal endangerment and trespassing very seriously. As we left the courtroom, I caught Margaret's eye momentarily. The mask of demure concern had vanished, replaced by cold fury that sent a chill through me despite the legal victory. The boundary war had entered a new phase, and paper protections suddenly seemed inadequate against such determined hatred. The barn incident created a fracture line through our rural community. People who had previously maintained neighborly neutrality felt compelled to choose sides. Some neighbors, particularly those with livestock or who valued property rights, rallied to my support. Others, especially newer residents from urban areas concerned about having large animals nearby, sympathized with Margaret despite her methods. The division became apparent at the local farmers' market the weekend after the court hearing. Vendors I had chatted with for years suddenly found urgent business elsewhere when I approached their stalls. Others made a point of loudly greeting me and asking about thunder, clearly signaling their allegiance. The previously cohesive community had transformed into a patchwork of allegiances, with property boundaries taking on new significance. One unexpected outcome of the incident was the emergence of stories from other neighbors who had experienced Margaret's boundary obsessions. Frank Miller, whose property backed up to the Wilsons, on the western side, stopped by my farm one evening with a six-pack of beer and tales of his own boundary disputes with Margaret. She claimed my garden shed was 6 inches over the property line, he explained as we sat on my porch. Had surveyors out 3 times trying to prove it. When they all confirmed the shed was on my property, she started complaining about the color being against some homeowner's covenant that does not exist in our area. Similar stories emerged from other neighbors. Margaret had reported the Johnsons' chicken coop as a health hazard. She had filed noise complaints about the Anderson children's backyard trampoline. She had photographed and reported the Diaz family for an unapproved fence stain. Each story followed the same pattern: an initial reasonable-sounding complaint, followed by escalation when officials found no violation, culminating in some form of direct interference. The most surprising visitor arrived 2 weeks after the court hearing. I was repairing fence posts when David Wilson's SUV pulled into my drive again. This time, he looked even more haggard, his movements slow and deliberate as he approached. "Margaret is staying with her sister in Portland for a few weeks," he explained without preamble. "I wanted to speak with you while she is away." I offered him water, which he accepted gratefully before continuing. "Our marriage is not going to survive this," he confessed. "I have tolerated her boundary fixations for years, moving whenever things became untenable, but attacking your barn crossed a line I cannot ignore." "I am sorry to hear that," I said, genuinely sympathetic despite everything his wife had put me through. "I wanted you to know I am listing the property for sale," he continued, "and to warn you that Margaret is still fixated on your bull. The restraining order has only convinced her that you have corrupted the local authorities." David's warning proved prescient. Though Margaret remained physically absent, her online campaign intensified. My security cameras captured her sister photographing my property from the road, technically outside the restraining order's boundaries. The images appeared on community forums with inflammatory captions, alleging ongoing code violations and animal mistreatment. The county sheriff called me one afternoon to report that Margaret had been captured on municipal security cameras driving slowly past my property at 3:00 a.m., a clear violation of the restraining order. When confronted with the evidence, she claimed to have been disoriented and accidentally on the wrong road. The judge was not convinced and extended the restraining order for an additional year with stricter enforcement provisions. The situation reached a turning point when the local agricultural association called a community meeting to address recent neighborhood conflicts and animal welfare concerns. The meeting, held in the high school gymnasium, drew nearly every household within a 5-mile radius. I arrived early, uncertain of my reception, but determined to face whatever accusations emerged. The agricultural commissioner, a straight-talking woman with 30 years of farming experience, opened the meeting by setting clear ground rules. Fact-based discussion only, no personal attacks, and all claims about code violations must reference specific ordinances. What followed was unexpected. Rather than the Margaret-inspired condemnation of my bull that I feared, the meeting transformed into something like a public confession session, with neighbor after neighbor recounting their experiences with Margaret Wilson's boundary disputes and harassment. The watershed moment came when elderly Mrs. Tompkins, respected by everyone for her 50 years in the community, took the microphone with shaking hands. "That woman tried to claim my maple tree dropped leaves on her property deliberately," she announced, prompting uncertain laughter that died when she continued. "Then she poisoned it. 100-year-old maple that my grandfather planted. I could never prove it was her, but the arborist found drill holes at the base filled with herbicide." The revelation opened a floodgate of similar stories, each more outrageous than the last. Margaret had not simply targeted me and Thunder. She had been systematically attempting to reshape the neighborhood to her specifications through intimidation and manipulation. By the meeting's end, the community had not only rallied around me, but had formed a neighborhood watch program, specifically designed to document any further harassment from Margaret or her proxies. The Agricultural Commissioner closed with a clear statement supporting responsible livestock owners and the rural character of our community. As I drove home that evening, I felt a bittersweet vindication. The community support was heartening, but it had come at the cost of collective trauma. Margaret Wilson had managed to fundamentally alter our neighborhood's trusting nature, leaving us more vigilant but less innocent than before. The for sale sign appeared on the Wilson property exactly 1 month after the community meeting. It stood like a white flag of surrender at the end of their driveway, tangible evidence that our boundary war was approaching its conclusion. David Wilson had made good on his promise to sell, though Margaret reportedly opposed the decision vehemently. The final court proceedings occurred while the property languished on the market. The district attorney had pursued criminal charges despite Margaret's attempts to have them dismissed. The security footage, combined with the documented history of harassment and the testimonies of multiple neighbors, created an insurmountable case against her. Margaret appeared in court wearing the same demure, victim-like persona she had adopted in earlier hearings, but the judge had reviewed too much evidence to be swayed by the performance. She was found guilty of criminal trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and animal endangerment. The judge sentenced her to 18 months of probation, mandatory counseling, and ordered her to pay restitution for the damaged barn door and lock. Most significantly for me, the judge granted a permanent restraining order prohibiting Margaret from coming within 1,000 feet of my property, and imposed a substantial civil penalty for emotional distress and property damage. The financial award would not make me wealthy, but it would cover the security upgrades I had installed and contribute to much-needed barn improvements.